as Lee said, we have the grant model, we have the membership model, and we have an underwriting model. And those are going to be our three core streams of revenue to start off with. But then we hope to actually expand into different other models that have been successful at some of the other nonprofit organizations that are part of the national organization called Institute for Nonprofit News. So the good news is that, while a lot of the traditional publications are dying, and there's major cutbacks, there's been a steady increase in nonprofit news and a very high success rate of nonprofit newsrooms surviving. So we feel like we're on the right path. Just because of the success that has been going on for the past 12 years in this area.
Just to expand on that, do you think the future of local news is nonprofit, especially since national news organizations like the New York Times or stuff like that is increasingly leaning on a large subscriber, a large amount of subscribers and taking money in from there. And local news has in the past done a lot of advertising and things like that. So do you think nonprofits are the way to go?
Yeah, didn't you just send that article, Lee, about nonprofits are going to be the future?
I did. There's I think I can't remember which publication it was, but it was a national newspaper where somebody was opining in a column about the growth of the nonprofit model and that being a possible viable model for larger news outlets. But at the end of the article, it was like, well, the sticking point is somebody has to give it all away.
Yeah.
The only way to turn a for-profit into a nonprofit is to give away your assets. And as you might imagine, even if that was seen as a viable model by some of the major media that are private for-profit entities, they may not be eager to give their assets away. So I think maybe one answer to your question is that the future of media is innovation. And, I'm not being glib. I think that innovation can happen with a variety of different models, both nonprofit and for-profit, and maybe through a social venture model as well. And there are, clear models of for-profit media organizations that have innovated tremendously. I mean, here locally, I think Crane's Cleveland Business is really a tremendous publication with a lot of really talented, well-sourced writers. And then the New York Times is I haven't studied it, but my understanding is that they're actually doing pretty well. And a lot of it is increased subscription revenue, especially in the wake of the 2016 election, when people might be, looking for a great in-depth source to get their news. But at the same time, the nonprofit sector has surged. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I know INN does. And it's, there's several thousand nonprofit journalists around the country. So I think that's probably what we're likely to see in the future. I don't know what that means for local daily papers. I really don't. I'm not. I think that there's going to be a range of models out there around the country, and some of them are going to be successful and some of them are not.
Yeah, and talk about innovation. There's a publication in Akron called The Devil's Strip. And they have gotten a lot of national recognition because they are putting together a co-op model where their members are part of the, organization. So it's different, and they seem to be doing well. I know there's a lot of eyes watching them and see if this is a model that can be sustainable. So people are trying a lot of different creative ways to build revenue.
It looks like Anna has a question in the chat. If you'd like to ask it yourself, just unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, my camera's not working, but I'm Anna, and I'm in the School of Graduate Studies. And I just wanted to understand a little bit more when you were talking about the journalism crisis. I just was kind of wondering if you could share a little bit about like how that came about, specifically in Cleveland, and kind of like how it's impacted Cleveland.
Yeah. Tammy, do you want to start that one?
Sure. I mean, the newspaper crisis has been going on for probably over 20 years now. And it was really created by the internet. And also, I think a lot of big egos running newspapers. So this is like nationally what's happening with newspapers. So, I mean, newspapers, local daily newspapers, they were, they were money makers. They made gobs and gobs of money. There was only, one place to advertise, the car dealerships, the classifieds, it was just like, printing money for them. And I think they just got a little lazy and didn't realize and plan for the internet. And once the internet was created and, there were other ways to get news, the newspaper industry started to see a loss in revenue. And I think another thing that, killed newspapers were the classifieds. I mean, that was a huge revenue source. And then classifieds were on eBay or, like people were posting, individually, if they were selling something. So they started to lose revenue in the traditional, in the way that they were traditionally getting revenue, and they weren't innovating themselves and looking for, how can we, what ways are we going to be able to sustain, our business model. And one thing that they also didn't do was they never put value on the subscription model. So the whole model was advertising based. And so when the advertising started to dry up, the subscriptions were like, you could get a, newspaper for, $1.50. There just wasn't the value placed on it. So, and so that just trained everyone to think that, newspapers were like a commodity and not really a public necessity. So that's kind of the background of how this crisis started, and it just continued to snowball and snowball. And eventually, like some of the larger industry, like the larger newsrooms, like the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, they figured it out and really started to put in subscription models and start to build on digital advertising, and started to get readers to pay for the content that they were providing. Oh, and the other huge part is social media. Social media really changed the whole landscape of journalism, because people could start getting news from, Facebook or Twitter, and they weren't, looking to, they didn't even have to purchase a newspaper or subscribe to a newspaper. So that really impacted the industry tremendously. And all that then, all that was going on and, created a serious problem for Cleveland. And because the print model was no longer sustainable, that's when all the layoffs started to come. And that's where things started to move to digital.
Yeah.
Want to jump in, Lee?
Yeah. So just to add to that, you asked how the journalism crisis has impacted Cleveland. So one of the studies that we cite in our pitch deck is basically that when you lose local journalism, or when local journalism is weakened, that it actually, the researchers have seen an increase in corruption, or I should say lack of accountability, and a less efficient use of taxpayer dollars. So, when there's nobody covering City Hall in depth, or digging into those investigative stories or looking at issues of accountability, then you're less likely to get, I guess, the kind of outcomes that you want in terms of our leaders being responsive to addressing the challenges that our community faces and working with citizens to solve problems. And the study also shows that people are less engaged in their own communities when they don't have, good, high quality, trusted local news sources to go to. So this has been a problem for an awfully long time. It certainly didn't, as I think Tammy's history is completely accurate. But having grown up here before the internet, outing myself, it was a problem then too, in terms of lack of coverage of urban communities. So it's this is a new version of an old problem, and this is one innovative way to address it.
Yeah, thank you. That's really helpful. I know that when I drive past the Plain Dealer location, my parents always say, "Oh, nobody's there anymore." So they always make a comment like that. And so I've definitely seen online a lot of criticism towards the Plain Dealer over the past 10 to 15 years, just kind of saying it's not really that curated anymore, and it's not really just a lot of different feedback about it. So it's interesting. And then, also the whole concept of the fake news type of thing, which has become more popular in the past 5 years or the past few years. And that kind of personally, I guess for millennial, my generation, it just sometimes turns you away from the news and can have you going to certain places on Twitter or something to get news, but it might not be fair and balanced and things like that. So that's a whole other issue that is interesting.
Yeah, and I feel strongly that people should realize that the lack of local journalism is a crisis, and everyone should be concerned with it. There's news deserts that are popping up everywhere, and if you hear that an area is a food desert, you kind of understand what that means. But when you hear people talk about news deserts, I feel that kind of gets lost because there isn't that emotional connection, and also because people are getting information from so many different sources, but it's not necessarily local news, and that's what really needs to, the local news is what really needs to be told and written on a consistent basis to keep people, as Lee said, engaged and build trust again, with our community and our residents, and bring that watchdog back, because that's the critical piece that's missing. No one is watching City Hall. No, I mean, okay, no, I'm exaggerating. It's not no one, but not enough people are watching City Hall.
Yeah, we get dozens of subscribers and social media followers every week since we've launched, and I would say that the three we always ask for story ideas and suggestions and comments, and the three that I hear most often is what's going on with local government, cover local government. People want to know about the Cleveland neighborhoods and the small businesses that don't get a lot of coverage, not just what's happening downtown, which is obviously very important, but some of the neighborhoods as well. And then they want, investigative stories. They want stories about problems and solutions. Somebody said today, why does Frank Jackson keep getting reelected? So I'm not going to tackle that one, but those are the kinds of comments that we get from our readers and the kind of things that I know they're interested in. So that gives us a little bit of data, I guess, on what our audience is interested in and what fuels people's interest in local journalism, and then we try to address those needs.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for the question.
Yes, thank you, Anna. So in terms of building an audience, however, and building reader trust, so how do you build reader engagement? A lot of that is through social media and marketing, I'm assuming. The internet has done a lot of damage to local journalism, but now it is the way that it is carried. So I don't know, what is your strategies in that?
Yeah. Do you want to take that or you want me to?
Go ahead, Tammy.
Yeah, so building audience is a challenge because we want to do this thoughtfully and deliberately. And so, we've started with our newsletter, and we also are very active on social media. But down the road, we have several other ideas on how to build audience. I mean, and there's some tactical things too that we can be doing, such as, better SEO and, stuff with our website, but eventually, we want to look at building strategic partnerships with a lot of the CDCs in Cleveland, and strategic partnerships with organizations in the inner ring suburbs. And what that means is that, they're sharing our content that's relative to their residents, and they're promoting the land. So moving forward, those strategic partnerships will be incredibly valuable. We're looking for influencers, if you guys know of anyone, so influencers in, the Cleveland neighborhoods, or influencers in, the inner ring suburbs, because those people carry a tremendous amount of power. And if they, push out one of our stories, then we know that it's reaching this, audience. And hopefully they'll be encouraged to go back and look at the website and, click on to our subscriber list. So it's going to take some time, and I feel that the content and the audience, they go hand in hand. So, the more content we create, the more audience, we'll be able to generate, because we're expanding, our stories topics. But it's definitely a challenge, and and also the other challenge is, with COVID-19, we're not out and being seen ever. We just, the Cleveland Foundation just had an annual meeting that we go to every year. That's a great place for networking. You can be seen, you can make connections with people. If they see you, they think of the land, but, it was on Zoom. So who are you seeing? You don't have those kind of connections. So it's a different world. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. We also have a question from Bob here in the audience. So if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Tammy. Bob Sopko. So Craig Newmark, Craigslist, who also contributed to the downturn of newspapers because of the classified ads. That wasn't the goal. But he is now putting millions of dollars into making sure journalism is healthy. Have you contacted him, his organization? What do you think of his efforts? Thanks.
Do you have his email or phone number?
Yeah, I have not contacted him.
Yes, it's Craig at Craigslist.org. Seriously, but yeah, I would take a look at it. He is adamant about that and helping veterans, and he has an affinity for Cleveland because he did go to Case Western.
Oh, okay. Well, we're on it, Bob. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is heartening about local journalism is that there are a lot of players working on this nationally, and Facebook and Google are very invested in the future of local news and have developed funding and programs to help local news. So obviously, Craig Newmark has done that as well. So I think that definitely does bode, although it can't necessarily sort of undo the complex problems with social media, it definitely bodes well for the future of local journalism, that those funding sources are available. And we hope to tap into some of them.
Yeah. Lee, were you going to say something about audience development?
Oh, I was just going to add, I think the question that Elizabeth brought up about trust is a really important one.
Yeah.
And certainly we know from our own, I know from my own experiences as a journalist who's reported on the community, as well as studies of the community, that there's a lot of communities that just don't trust traditional news organizations or follow traditional news organizations because they don't see themselves reflected in those organizations, whether it's the staff or the reporting or who gets talked to for the stories. And so I think that how do news organizations address that? I think it's partially through trying to make sure your staff is diverse and reflects the community. It's through making sure your board, in the case of a nonprofit, is diverse and reflects the community. And by trying to build relationships with folks who are traditionally marginalized by the news. So to give one example, I have a reporter right now. He's a white male reporter who's working on reporting a story about Mount Pleasant, which is a primarily Black community. And he's getting connected to the local businesses through a person in the community. So, they won't necessarily talk to him directly, but he's trying to make those connections so that he can report out the story about how businesses are being impacted by COVID-19.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think the trust will come once people start to see themselves in the news, have their voices heard, and also in the newsroom.
Yep.
And typically journalism is one of the whitest industries or professions, I should say.
And speaking of businesses being impacted by COVID-19, I believe Amina has a question. So go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. So my name is Amina. My question was about COVID's impact on journalism. And you were talking about how, I misspelled it in the chat, but DeLand is a nonprofit startup in Cleveland, and that its revenue relies mostly on subscription and member base. So how has it been, staying afloat with a lot of the financial impact that COVID has had, as well as how has it been maintaining connections while at the same time social with social isolation and things like that in quarantine?
Yeah. I think the connections question is a tough one because it is harder to obviously to connect with people, and it's harder to do reporting in person. At the same time, I think people are in front of their computers more and they're hungry for news. And so that is helping us in the sense that audiences for news are high right now. Tammy, do you want to talk about the revenue side?
Yeah, it's challenging. We have a modest revenue goal for this year, but our revenue goal for next year is very ambitious. And it is going to be challenging, because so many organizations and businesses are cutting back, and here we are asking them for money. So it's really just finding those individuals or foundations or corporations that are very much Cleveland centric, and they understand the critical role that local journalism plays in democracy and how it really it does impact Cleveland. It has a broader impact of population growth, and engagement. So COVID has definitely made it much more challenging, but also we're confident that because of the Plain Dealer's newsroom closing, that there's a heightened awareness of the need for local journalism. That was such a huge hit. You don't really have to explain it as much anymore. People get it. It's we don't have people on the ground anymore. We're just this digital Cleveland.com outlet. So that's helping to tell our story, but it's going to be challenging, but we're going to make it. We've got goals, and it's just pounding the pavement, reaching as many people as you can.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It looks like we have a question from Mitch from LinkedIn Live. So DeLand is a digital newspaper. So he's asking, do you think you'll ever do print? How do you cater to the audience that is looking for a replacement for the Plain Dealer, like older generations?
I don't think being a startup, I'm not sure we've answered that question yet. We have talked about doing print at some point in the future, but obviously it's a completely different animal in terms of, printing and distribution and getting advertising or underwriting to support it and so forth. I do think it does offer, if we're able to do some kind of a print product and distribute it in the community, at community locations, it might offer one remedy for addressing the digital divide and reaching an audience that we're not already connected to or could be connected to through the internet or through social media. But I don't know. I'm not really sure what role print plays yet. What do you think, Tammy?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine the land ever having a substantial print presence, but we do hope that the land will eventually be like a go-to news outlet where you know, instead of grabbing your paper, you grab your digital, you grab your device, your digital device, and you sit with a cup of coffee and you read the land. So, yeah, in terms of print, if we've only talked about, printing like newsletters, out and distributing them into neighborhoods that don't have access, online access. So.
I was just going to say really quick, I'm not sure if anyone else can relate to this, but I just know being a student right now and things being virtual, it is sometimes just difficult with the amount of screen time. So I'm just, some of that is kind of an interesting thing to figure out throughout COVID-19, because I just find myself after I kind of do the must-do kind of things on the computer, I'm just kind of finding that my eyes are a little tired, or I'm a little tired of staring at the computer. So just it'll be an interesting thing for journalism in general, I guess.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, it's such a great point, because we're all zoomed out, right? I mean, we're sitting here on Zoom right now, but we're all kind of zoomed out. And I spend my day mostly in front of a computer. And I think a lot of media organizations that are like us, that are focused on in-depth news, are trying to figure out how to create a product on the internet that feels more like print. Doesn't just feel like something that you want to scan through quickly, or something that, is sort of transactional in nature. And again, I would point to the New York Times as an example, where they have such an excellent web product. And I read it both in print and online. I find that when I read it in print, I'll spend more time with the stories, especially with the magazine stories that are quite long. But on a daily basis, I'll read it on my phone, and I don't feel as much screen fatigue, just because it's so well designed and it looks so good,
Yeah. And it's compelling.
What's that?
Yeah.
I said, and it's compelling, but I hear you with the screen time. Yeah.
Yeah. My only feedback there would be that I find to want to engage with things that maybe are webinar based or social media. So I know Cranes Cleveland has recently been trying to engage a little bit with some webinars. So I signed up for one of those upcoming. And also, yeah, but I think millennial in general, just we definitely are on social media towards the end of the day after we're done wrapping up things like that. So social media and webinar would be just two things I would offer as things that get my attention still after I'm tired of looking.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's really helpful, because we have talked about adding some webinars or some engagement opportunities. So we'll look at doing that.
Yeah, definitely. There's some really interesting speakers in Cleveland, really interesting companies. So it's kind of like a cultural mix. The Cranes Cleveland thing is a behavioral health thing, that mental health type of thing that they're putting out there. But yeah, there's an array of things, and it seems like a lot of people are willing to jump on Zoom and kind of share their story. So pretty good.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Anna.
That's a great idea.
So moving on from that, how do you decide what sort of stories to cover, what neighborhoods to cover, especially in the Cleveland area, the Cleveland neighborhoods and suburbs you've mentioned wanting to cover, but what exactly do you look for in a story?
Mm-hmm. We have a number of topics that we hope to cover. That we're starting with kind of trying to focus on just a few, because we're in the startup mode, and there's just a couple of us working on this, as well as a team of freelance journalists. So looking at development stories, but from a community development angle, from a social equity angle, local government, certainly. We've been following stories coming out of Cleveland City Hall. and then social equity stories. So stories that about whether it's small businesses or community efforts that kind of address some of the equity challenges in our community. In terms of stories, we try to look for stuff that's unique, that's different, that's not being covered, or where we can cover it in a different way. So, today we published 4 new stories. One of them is about the city council is trying to pass a new ordinance to get a new complete and green streets ordinance, which is basically trying to make sure that streets work for everybody, not just for cars. So that they're safe for people on bikes, people walking, people with disabilities, transit users. I was somewhat surprised that the ordinance was introduced last week and no one had covered it yet, although it's a major mobility issue in Cleveland. So we worked with a journalist out of Kent State through the News Lab program at KSU, and Paige Bennett, and she wrote about the new legislation. So that would be an example of where we're trying to, it's a social equity issue because it affects folks who don't have cars. It's a transportation issue, it's local government, and no one else has covered it. So we're bringing, news to the public that maybe otherwise wouldn't get covered.
All right. It looks like Harry has a question. So Harry, if you'd like to unmute yourself and introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you, Shreyas. I'm Harry. I'm a third year in electrical engineering, computer science. I'm the son of a journalist, so I've been hearing mixed things about journalism throughout my entire life. But I'm curious with the new nonprofit model that you're using, that's distinct from the NPR, the way NPR operates. What does the prospect of a journalism career look like?
Yeah. I certainly think that, when you're working for a nonprofit, it's a mission-based organization. So, journalism, if in that case, you really start to look at journalism as a public service type of career. In terms of actual career opportunities, I think it's a tough time. And one of the things that I worry about is where are we going to be at in 5 or 10 years if we don't have a solid pipeline of young journalists. One of the programs that the land is creating actually is an internship program and a mentoring program with a specific focus on writers of color and writers who are underrepresented in journalism generally. Trying to give opportunities for those folks and create a win-win where they can also provide us with content. Hence the Kent State partnership. So, I would hope that through efforts like that, it encourages college students to go into the field of journalism, and that some of those college programs stay strong. But I think it's a tough time. And I wouldn't, I wouldn't be surprised if, if there was a decline in enrollment in journalism programs as a result of the fact that there's certainly a perception out there that the local media or the media industry in general is just very challenged.
Yeah, I was anticipating this question and thinking about how we would answer it. And well, it definitely is a tough time, and the entire industry is evolving. There could be opportunities of, like new opportunities of innovation or, through nonprofits. So, it is going to be challenging. I always like to put a positive spin, because you don't want to see your industry die, and you want to make sure that young people are still enthusiastic about journalism, and, as Lee said, that there's a pipeline. So I guess, I think we're going to see, with the nonprofit model, like more and more, newsrooms popping up with, different types of business models. So there will be opportunity. It's just not going to look like how it looks today.
What are your perceptions of journalism as a career?
I've heard, it really depends on where things are, because a lot comes from my mother, but that a lot of people who have the skill set for journalism are tempted by maybe a career in marketing where they can use their communication skills and make more money, or if they are especially active, they'll go into politics. And so journalism is the middle ground that's missing out. I personally don't have the skill set for it, but I certainly recognize the importance, and I hope that your model's a way to rejuvenate this work.
Hospital marketing is where journalists go to die. Don't quote me on that though. But it's hard, and there's a lot of. I mean, look at where a lot of the former PD folks ended up. I mean, some of them are gone on to do actually amazing things at national organizations, but a lot do end up in communications. And I'm not disparaging the communications field, but it's just might be a little steadier and maybe a little less hustle than journalism. There's a lot of hustle to journalism, and it's a very insecure field right now. So, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon. Certainly working for a nonprofit doesn't offer a lot of stability. But we do hope, but it does offer a lot of public service opportunities. And, journalism, especially the kind of journalism that we do, can be really fun and really meaningful, especially when you can see the impact on the community. So we hope to work with emerging journalists and provide some of those opportunities in the future, and hopefully employ a couple people, create some jobs.
Yeah.
One thing I was just going to add there was I used to live in New York City for work, and this, I don't know if everyone's heard of the Skim, but it is two women. The founders are two women that previously worked as journalists, and they wanted to start their own company, and they wanted to really put the news out in a very digestible way. So I know that they've had a lot of success with getting a ton of subscriptions, and their platform is really based on people want to read the news in kind of a fun way. So they've definitely had some success there, and it's kind of interesting watching them because they've grown their company into so much more than just reporting the news. So I think that as far as opportunities go, definitely seems to be, some of those kind of startups like your own that are trying to make it about more than just the news, and kind of a little bit full circle, kind of like a lifestyle type of thing, which is just kind of interesting to watch. But they definitely seem to have had some success. So interesting to watch.
Yeah, my kids got me into logging into the Skim. So I used to read it. It comes out daily, right?
Yeah, it comes every morning at I think 6:00.
Yeah, I did finally unsubscribe to it. It's very much geared to millennials.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it was great. It had a great tone, and I could see how it was very compelling.
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting. Yeah, I was just going to say it's kind of an interesting mix because they definitely have the news in there, but then towards the end, they definitely have more of a little bit of product, and that's the way that they make their money is by having all those product links out there. So, yeah, it's definitely an interesting mix that they have.
Yeah. Well, thank you for mentioning it because I completely forgot about the Skim.
Yeah, they've definitely also gotten very behind certain things. They got super involved with Rock the Vote and become a big voting advocate, and try to get people easier ways to vote and different things like that. So just interesting.
Yeah, I think you're hitting. I will definitely check it out because I'm not super familiar with it, but I think you're hitting on something really big that we're trying to tap into, and I'm always interested in feedback in this, which is that traditionally journalism provides the news, and you could say simply by providing the news, it's engaging people in those issues, but we really want to take it a step farther. So we do not view ourselves as advocates necessarily of a certain party or policy or anything like that. but we do want to use journalism as a tool for civic engagement. And so just in our first few months, we've done stories on voting. We've done stories about local legislation where, advocacy groups are putting out action alerts, and just trying to inform people and make them aware and engage them. So I guess I'm interested in knowing how, what young people think about that type of news, I guess, that asks you to do more than read it, but asks you to actually like engage in issues.
Yeah, I think it's like an interesting point. Everyone probably has their own opinion about it, but I think like definitely for like millennial generation, I think people are just trying to get involved, see what they care about, see what they like want to spend their time advocating for. I feel right now with social media, it's so overwhelming because there's like the same person advocating for like 9 different issues and like that might be in one day. So it's really confusing. But yeah, personally, like me, I try to understand like what are the core things that I care about and like spreading that type of information rather than like sharing like so many different things. I think the biggest thing with that I've responded to because of the skim is like just like breaking down the news and like making things like easier to understand, and yeah, just like putting all the issues out there so people can kind of pick and choose what do they actually care about.
Right. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Anna. It looks like we're running out of time today. I'm sorry we couldn't get to everyone else's questions, but we definitely had some great conversations today. But yeah, that's all we have today. So I'll throw it back to Doug.
All right. Well, thank you so much. This was a great session. I appreciate Tammy and Lee taking the time today to talk to us about what journalism could look like in the future and their efforts in present time to try to drive local journalism forward. Just a couple of notes about upcoming events that we're having. Tomorrow, we have Mark Wells, the president of Sky Technology and former GE exec, talking about his experience from GE to being a startup. So that's tomorrow at 1 p.m. We also have Lisa Delp from the Ohio Third Frontier talking next Tuesday on the role of government in entrepreneurship. That's going to be at 10 a.m. And then on Tuesday the 8th at 1 p.m., we're going to talk with Mark Roman from De Novo Advisors about due diligence for investing and then how to stabilize your operations if you have a startup company. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope to see you tomorrow as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug. Thank you so much for inviting us.
Thanks for having us.
Excited. And yeah, if you guys are interested, we'd love to subscribe you to the land and and somehow continue some of the conversations that we've had. So